I'm already recording the session. Thank you, guys, gals, for being here. Thank you, Sandra, our guest speaker, our first guest speaker for today's session. Remember that we are on week 15. We almost covered all the topics for this course. Usually we begin with like a summary about what has happened into the general context about news, about relevant information. But today I want to stick to the presentation of the agenda, and then the presentation of our first guest speaker. She's Sandra. She's a PhD. I'm gonna read her curriculum in a really quick fashion. Well, Sandra is Doctor of Philosophy in Planning and Decision Analysis. She actually lives in Stockholm, Sweden, or really close to Stockholm, Sweden. Stockholm, remember, guys, is the capital city of Sweden. She's a dedicated educator with experience in teaching, course development, and leadership and coordination of commissioned education. She has engaged in social science research with broad experience in research, in investigation, in evaluation, and all those initiatives have to do strongly with community development. She also has she's really proficient into the project management skills, and she has a lot of experience and knowledge about how to communicate properly with diverse audiences, with diverse stakeholders and people about what those projects are all about. In general terms, as I mentioned before, she studied her PhD program, el doctorado, in the school. I'm going to read the name of the School of Architecture and the Built Environment, Department of Urban Planning and Environment, Division of Urban and Regional Studies. This might be equivalent for us in Tec de Monterrey. This might be equivalent of the department that is called Ambientes Construidos, or built environments, the same as the name of her department. So the guys who belong to the Built Environment department should be like into a more appropriate context within this part. She has also studied a master's degree in, can you help me remember that, Sandra?
The master's in Peace and Development Studies.
Peace and Development Studies. And she's got a bachelor's degree in International Social Science. When she was studying the bachelor's and the master's degree, she spent a lot of time here in Mexico, like really, really long years. And okay, with that information, I can welcome you, Sandra. Thank you so much for joining today's session. I think because I know you since around 2003 or 4, I can remember the year. I think it was 2003. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so, or 4. Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around that. So I'm strongly. I believe strongly that your audience, my students, are going to be really, really excited about listening to your experience. I don't want to go any further into the dynamics of this space. I already talked to you about this, so feel free to start speaking about any given topic. If you want to share something, you can do it, like screen sharing. Just let me know so I can help you with that. I think it's already available for you to share any kind of content. And again, welcome. Thank you so much. And the microphone is all yours. Go ahead, please, Dr. Sandra Karlsson. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to get the invitation. And I think it's a really interesting course for you to have. Also for me to revisit those experiences that I had when I was working in Mexico, because it's both. I both have leadership experiences from Mexico and compared also with the Swedish context and being Swedish. So both working and being a student as a Swedish person in Mexico and in Sweden, and then comparative. So So the longer I am working, I meet more challenges and more experiences. So I think for me, having started my career in Mexico was really helpful, because I had a lot of intercultural challenges on the onstart of my profession, so to say, because I went to Mexico. Yeah, it was 2003 or 2004, and I was studying. I hadn't been working before that, and when I came, I studied exchange program in Tec de Monterrey, and it was an internship part of that program. I can't remember the course exactly what it was called, but I think it was called internship. So we were, as foreign students, had a possibility to work at the NGOs, local NGOs. So I did that for a while, and that got me started and got me. I got to know the NGO. NGO is not a business. The NGO organization, how it works in Mexico, and from there on, then I started to do some projects with other NGOs, and then after a while, I actually got invited to work with the projects with Conagua and with several universities in Mexico. So I had in Mexico, I would say I didn't have like a proper job 9 to 5. I had project jobs, and it was very specific to develop projects and work with the community development and rural development mostly. So with indigenous people in San Ildefonso, and also outside Mexico City. It was one of the las áreas paracaidistas, le dicen, ¿no? No sé si aún le dicen eso. And I think the most common international is like favela, which is like the Brazilian one, but paracaidista area, and working with a social project there. And then I went down to Chiapas to work in Chiapas with different projects. So I have, and I met in these different tasks and projects that I was working with. I met different types of leaders, of course. And being Swedish, I am used to very non-hierarchical. Is that how you say it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not so much hierarchy. So in Sweden, we are basically very, we treat each other similar. If it's the janitor, or if it's the boss, or if it's someone that is working with a high education, like for me, I have a doctorate, or if I'm working with someone that haven't any education at all for the work they do, we are treated the same. So for me, when I started to work in Mexico, I think the first thing that I reacted on was that it was all these titles that you had to use. And I heard about that because I think in Germany, they are even worse. Like if you are like double doctor, and you're doctor, and you have to say that, otherwise it's disrespectful. And in Mexico, I met that this is really important for Mexicans, that you say ingeniero, or profesora, or doctor, or doctora. And, but of course, also, since I am from a country where we don't do that, I kind of used the opportunity sometimes to not use it, and played on my innocence of not understanding the social or the cultural codes. So basically what I would do is that I knew in a certain situation that I was supposed to say doctor or ingeniero, but I wanted to kind of like get more of a sympathy with that person. And then I just called them by their name. And since I was a foreigner, they accepted it. And it worked for me to get more informally connected with them. And then also, so I did some experimentation with those things. And I think this is part of being from a different country. I think it wouldn't be allowed if I would have been Mexican, they would have expected me to know the rules. But since I wasn't expected to know the rules, they didn't know that I was purposefully disregarding them to see what that would gain me in question of confidence and trustfulness and to get more into the project, to get more responsibilities and such things. So that was something that was really interesting. So that was what hierarchies and titles, which was very different. Another thing also that I think, if like on the top of my head, that I can mention about the intercultural leadership is I had some really interesting experiences being a woman. And I worked a lot in male-dominated fields. I don't know, Jorge said that you are from different programs, but I worked, most of the projects that I was working with was a lot of engineers. So basically, it was all men and me. And of course, some of them were professor and some of them were doctor, but some of them were, they did not have any university education. So it was really interesting to see also how I was treated being a woman. And sometimes it was like positive, in the sense of me getting away with things maybe that a man would not have. For example, this thing about not using titles. I think maybe a man maybe would have not been treated the same. Don't know though. But also I had some issues with that. For example, I had co-workers that they were not like leaders in that sense, but we were co-workers and they did not have an education. But since I was informal and not making them call me, because then I was maestra, I wasn't a doctor when I was working in Mexico. So then they could be like, Sandrita. So they use these kind of diminutive, because there was, we were having a dispute about a meeting that we were supposed to have with the community. And this man's idea was, of course, to disregard of my wishes. So he would Sandrita me. So that I think would have been more difficult to do with a man using the language in such a way. So it's in the intercultural leadership, or in the cultural, like when you don't know the language properly. Sandrita for a friend, if my friends would call me Sandrita, that would be nice, and that would be like showing trust and trustfulness and that we are friends. But when a colleague does that, then it's disrespectful. So the use of words become really important. And then as I'm a foreigner, I had lived in Sweden for so many years, so I would see those things, and I would recognize them. But it's still hard to maybe react on it though. So I don't think I did a comeback to that man in that situation. But that was between colleagues. But also, I don't know, stop me if you have any questions or you want me to talk about something specific. Now I'm just going through themes. So now I'm on like male, women, male, female experiences. And so I have this particular thing that I remember, or situation. I was working with a colleague, and he was male, and we had a dispute about, we had one car, and both of us needed to use that car to do community visits. So it turns out that we had the same project, but the day after, we were going to have, he had made plans in one part of the community, and I had made plans with another part of the community. And he knew about my plans. So he knew that I had made plans, and I have told him before that I needed a car for that day. But then he comes and he says, "Whoa, no, you cannot have the car that day because I need it." And I was like, but I told you that I needed a car. But he thought that it was more important, the work that he was doing, because he was measuring soil, whatever. So I should say also that I work with social aspects of community development and also in urban and regional planning. So for me, in those projects, I was working with community building, with local residents in communities, in rural communities. So I was going to community meetings where we rounded up a lot of people from the communities to inform them about the projects and to try them to be like informed and integrated into the projects. So I try with my colleague several opportunities. So I talk to him and I say, okay, but we could do this solution, or we could do that solution, or we could do this solution. And he was like, nope. And he didn't come with any solution of his own. And then I was like, no, so then we can talk to the boss. So the boss can decide for us, because he was in Querétaro and we were in Chiapas. And he was like, no, we cannot talk to the boss about this. And that was, I think, my first experience of also relating to the way how you deal with a boss. Because in Sweden, it would be, if we as colleagues have a really difficult issue to solve, we would talk to the boss and then let the boss be the one to decide, because the boss is the one that manages the project and knows how much finance, for example, if we can rent a car for the day, or if we can take a taxi, one of us, or some solution. But then my male colleague, he was like, no, we cannot talk to the boss about anything. We have to solve everything by ourselves. And I don't know. I mean, that's up to you to discuss, I think, and maybe you have literature in it or experiences in other empirical work. But for me, there was an encounter where it felt like this employee felt that he had to resolve everything by himself, so that you could not talk to the boss, because that would show weakness and that you cannot do your work. So instead, he stopped everything, and this became a major conflict. So in the morning, I was going to use the car, and the car was gone. And then after, I called the boss, and I kind of like, people are waiting for me, and my boss was like, okay, take a taxi. So 1 hour late, the taxi comes, and then my colleague comes, and he just throws the keys to the car on the floor. It's like, take the car. Really annoyed. And this turns out to be even more conflicts afterwards. He doesn't talk to me, but he starts to behave really hard, really difficult. And so in the end, I talk to the boss myself when he comes for a visit. And this is, this I don't know if this is some typical thing. But so firstly, I see like this colleague boss kind of a situation where my colleague doesn't want to disturb the boss, because that would show a weakness, I think. And then when finally I talk to our boss and I tell him, like, we have this problem because I cannot work with my colleague anymore, because it was just us two in Chiapas and we could not communicate well. So I talk to my boss and I tell him, like, this is a problem, because we cannot do our work if we don't communicate. And he was like shutting me down totally after this incident. And then came more incidents. So the boss comes and we have a meeting, and I tell them everything. And I have like, I'm really nervous, because now I'm going to like talk to the boss, and here is my colleague with me, and we're sitting here in front of and I'm hoping that the boss will take responsibility of resolving these issues, because we are on the ground working like field work, and he is in the office. And so I'm like, we really need to solve this. And I tell him all the arguments for things that haven't been working. And I can't remember now what the colleague said, if he said anything. I don't think he had to say anything, because then my boss says, oh, but Sandra, you have to know that this is almost paraphrasing, but he said it in Spanish. So Sandra, you have to understand that for us Mexican men, it can be really hard to work with the highly professional women. So you have to forgive us for not doing this in a good manner. So he mentioned then that professional Mexicans have a difficulty working with academic professional women. And also, I think he said, can't remember, but I think he said something about foreign. Not sure about that, but I do remember that he then made excuses for my colleague. Not resolving the issue, but making excuses for my colleague because professional women are hard to work with because men are not used to that. And his conflict resolution, I don't know if anyone want to guess what his conflict resolution proposal was. Anyone have a guess? No, I see Anna and Katarina struggling their heads. He asked for us to hug. So he wanted us to hug and then let the issue go. Yes, Valeria, that's what he did. So yeah, I must say that I left that meeting with my jaw, just like Valeria wrote. It was because it was incomprehensible for me to understand how would we go on with developing this project? Like, how would we continue to work together as colleagues when this was the boss's conflict resolution? And I don't know, I'm not saying that this is something that happens everywhere or in every setting, but for me, it was really clear that professional women in Mexico, because I also had different other experiences, but this was a really typical, and it was like presented to me as a very like female male situation. And I don't know if that is the case still today, how it works, or if this is still something that is really prevalent in the Mexican job sector. But for me, it was really like a feminist kind of blow. So that was interesting. So hierarchies, different, male, female, complicated. What more? Is there any more themes that I should cover? Because I don't know how much time you want me to just speak. Because of course I have also like general issues about intercultural. Maybe I have one more example that I could bring up, referring to. But I'm not sure if that is intercultural. Because these two are like these two experiences I feel like are have to do with me not being Mexican, working in a Mexican environment or like a Mexican place. But then there's another experience that I'm not sure that it relates to the intercultural. But I think maybe in Sweden it would not have happened the same way, because I was working at an NGO for a while, and I only stayed for maybe 3 months because the job was not the job I liked, but the atmosphere, the work environment was really, it was managed in a way that it was one boss that decided everything. And then if someone had not done exactly what the boss wanted, it would be a meeting every Monday, and then the boss would basically yell at everyone in the room that had done like you do with children, basically, not even with children. Like she would shame them in front of all the colleagues, and then so there was a lot of things going on in this organization, and this was only one of the things that was problematic. So I decided to leave. So I'm not going to tell you all about all the things that were problematic, because there were several issues. But I didn't feel the confidence to talk to the organization about this. So I just said, I don't want to work here anymore. I want to quit. And so I resigned. And they asked me, so do you want to tell us why you resign? And I was like, no, I prefer not. Because I knew that they might bite my head off. So I didn't want to tell, but they were pushing and they were pushing. And then in a moment I was like, okay, well, I probably will not lose anything about telling them. So I told them, and basically what I told them was because they are NGOs, you know, like, and NGOs, they get funding from international organizations, and this NGO get funding from the UNDP, the PNUD. So they get audits, international audits from the International Monetary Bank, the IMF, and such. They get international audits. And basically what I told them was similar to what these international audits have been telling them for years. So what happened then was that I got my head beat off, because they yelled, like it was one person yelled and told me that this is exactly what everyone are telling us, but you are international, you just come for 2 seconds and you have no idea what the work we're doing here. You just come externally and you evaluate us, and you have no idea what we actually are doing. So I have no idea if this also is something that would like be able to generalize, but my experience of this was that this organization that gets international funding, both from the US, from civil society, and those how is it called, the one-on-one, so you do, donated money, so you don't pay taxes in the United States. Can't remember now, it was a long time ago what it's called, but it's artículo 101, algo así se llama, que las empresas estadounidenses, en vez de pagar impuestos, donan el dinero a ONGs, y entonces así lo pueden, evitar de pagar impuestos. Algo así.
Like a fiscal deduction,
So basically, I mean, the international audits, they say this year after year, and this organization refuses to take it seriously and refuses to do something about it, instead acting and reacting to those claims, saying that it's wrong because people are external and they don't know. So I think maybe this, I don't know if this is intercultural. What do you think, guys? I mean, because the previous one are like, if you think intercultural, female, male, and also foreigner. So I haven't been able to like categorize this as some like a phenomenon, but I think it was really really telling on how an NGO or a company can go on and still receive funding and still receive international responsible projects, and still not taking seriously the work environment, because people did not feel well at this place, but there was not so many jobs to get, so people still worked there, because this was one of the few jobs available in this small village city. I don't know if it's a city village. Yeah. So it's, and I think in Sweden, because we have a really strong fackrörelse, solidarity, words, languages, where workers go together in solidarity, and it's not used in Mexico, but because luz y agua, luz y fuerza.
Yeah, similar to a sindicato, Sandra, maybe?
Sindicato, yes,
Yeah.
sindicato. In Sweden, our sindicatos are working really well. Union, is it called
Yeah,
unions?
union.
Maybe
Yeah.
unions in English.
Yeah.
So in Sweden, we have really a functioning system for unions, sindicatos. So in Sweden, it would be really difficult to manage an organization in this matter because people would leave. People would not accept those kind of working environments. So it's not about the interculturality per se, but it's about if you have a system where you can exploit workers in that sense that you can treat them badly, you get international audits, you don't listen to them because you don't have to listen to them because you still get the people that work there. So it's also a systemic thing, I think. In this situation, it was systemic. It was like a lacking function of employee security or employee safety in a sense. And I'm not sure if that is part of your culture, Jorge, but I think this is when someone comes to Mexico to work, the employee security is really lacking, I would say. I also worked with different projects, and a difficulty for me was that I had to chase my salary. I had to go and chase my salary to different apartments. It's like, yeah, if you want to get paid, you have to go to this apartment this time, and then we will give you a check. And if I wasn't there at the time, and then I would come there, and the check wasn't ready. So sometimes it was these things that are like the irregularity of the work environment. I think that also affects. So in a leadership position, I think it's also important to. And also if someone is like working with international employees or international companies, this is really a big issue, I think. So yeah, what more could I share? So the system of sindicatos, male, female, hierarchies. What more, Jorge, could be
Or
do you?
Yeah. Guys.
Yeah, what do you think, guys? Do you have any
course.
questions? Are you like, is there anything I could referring to the literature that you're reading or something I've said that could be like, did you want a thread that you want me to pick up or something that I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, guys, remember that Sandra, she's also a professor, so she different from all the other guest speakers. Sandra has more of a tone as I do in the sessions. But Sandra, I also think that it's really, really important to address this general issue that we live as a society here in Mexico, which, as you mentioned before, has to do with gender roles and the role of the women in our society. Because, for example, this year the Nobel Prize for economics, it's been awarded to, let me get the name, to Claudia Goldin. She's from Harvard University, and Professor Goldin addresses in her cumulus of work. She addresses the huge differences about these gender roles in society and in working spaces. It's really important for me. What I'm trying to say with this is that it's really important for me to notice the difference, because Sandra, she comes from a Swedish culture, a Nordic culture, a Northern European culture. We belong to Latin American culture, Mexican culture, etc. And I think we couldn't be more far away in some aspects, in some cultural aspects. And the way we treat women in general terms here in Mexico, and the way we treat women in working spaces are hugely different from the way people treat each other in other countries. As you can remember, guys, Mari Carmen, she was our guest speaker from 15 days ago. Mari Carmen lived in Estonia. She's married to an Estonian. And she also noticed these huge differences regarding about how people interpret the women in general aspects. Mari Carmen said to us, like, okay, When I was living in Estonia, I didn't have any issues about the way I dressed. Nobody cared about the way I dressed. And here in Mexico is completely different because people tend to have an opinion and an expectation. So Sandra, going back to what I'm trying to say is that it is really, really important for us to address gender roles and the lack of responsibility that we have as a society towards a lot of women. And of course, in this case, women with studies, with capabilities and capacities to perform in any given spaces. Here in Mexico, we have this strong issue. For example, it is considered, according to numbers, that women perceive around 30% less in general terms when compared to men in terms of wages or salaries, just because the pure fact of them being women, that it's like a really, really strong issue with that. I don't know if you can remember like any other differences or strong differences in the working spaces, outside the working spaces, about how you as a woman had the experience living here in Mexico. Also, just not for us to be keeping into the negative side of it. I think you can share with us, Sandra, also what were the quirks and the positive experiences of you specifically being a woman here in Mexico and being a Northern European woman, a blonde woman, etc., because that also has a lot to do with how we behave in this context. Of course, I'm mentioning this because I know you quite well, so feel free to share with us this like perspective. On one hand, other issues regarding the gender, and on the other hand, what were the quirks or the positive experiences that you have in that sense?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's hugely different. I think Sweden, now, if you compare to Mexico, we are on a kind of like a feminist backlash. So we have been working, we had a really strong feminist movement in the 40s, another one in the 70s. And the one in the 70s, the feminist movement, they made it possible for us to have childcare. So childcare is something that is part of the state. So the state pay for it. You pay a piece of it, but you also get childcare financing. So women and men are expected to work the same. We don't have housewives in Sweden, like in general. Of course there are, but like the system, everything is built. Also, I could mention that we have like a culture, like the society that is built on the individual, not the family. So it's a very individualized society that Sweden is. And that I think Mexico is still very familiar. So it's like a family unit. Whereas in Sweden, the political idea is that no, we as individuals should be able to sustain ourselves. We should not, as individuals, be dependent on anyone. And that is part of the female emancipation. And the positivities of the female emancipation is that we can work the same. We don't have to marry. We don't have to have a man. For example, I live alone. I have a 2-room apartment where I am right now. I have my dog. I work full time. And I have a really good life. And I don't need a man for my economic situation. And I think maybe, I know that professionals in Mexico, they don't need a man, like women, they don't need a man either. But if you are not a professional, if you don't have an education, if you don't work with a wage that is like sufficient, then it could be hard for you. So that is why in Mexico, the family is so important. But here in Sweden, it's not. So then, of course, I don't know if you've seen I think, Jorge, you have seen the documentary on isolation in Sweden, because due to this, I mean, there are negative aspects of the individual society, and that is that we are alone. I could say on the one hand, yes, I can live here in my 2-room apartment with my dog and I'm really happy. But I can also say, yeah, but I'm really lonely as well, because I don't have my family close. I don't have a family to rely on, because I don't have to have that. But since I don't have to have that, it's also an isolation. So it's a weighing there. And that is the same you weigh when you have a family society as Mexico is. So, and also, yes, we are much more, the gender, like in terms of wages, we are much more similar between men and women in Sweden. But I saw a study, I don't have the recent statistics, but I saw a study that was done not so long ago. And they say if we keep on, so if you have like a table, so if we keep on like closing the gap between male and female wages, if we keep on the same rate as now, women will reach the same level of wage for the same work in 25 years.
Okay, interesting.
But that is only if we keep the same way. And as I said, not everywhere, but I work at university, and I also work with university where we have a broadened background. So we have a lot of students in my university that are from backgrounds where families are born abroad, or they don't have an academic education. And I don't know if that is the case, but I've seen several when they have like reflections, and when I hear talks and also in social media, you can hear some women say that, no, but we are equal enough. And men needs to earn more because they are the ones that are going to invite us to restaurants. So they need more money for that. So there are both sides as well. But yes, we are much more equal in that sense, but we still have a long way to go also here, but we also have a strong feminist movement. And then the other question, I think about positive, and I think Mexico for me was really positive, like privately, but I think and also me, being a woman, I got these benefits. For example, one thing of the benefit of working, for example, in some projects was that I automatically, and I don't know if it was because I was a woman or because I'm a foreigner, but I was invited, for example, in these projects that I was working with, I invited myself basically to meetings that I wasn't supposed to go to, because we were working groups. And it was supposed to be like the project leaders. So they flew in. So we that was working with field work, we were not supposed to go to these meetings. The bosses that came from around, but I wasn't satisfied with that. So I went to these meetings and no one said anything about it. And I don't know if that would have been okay if I would have been Mexican or man. Maybe foreign man. Yes. Mexican man? I don't think so. Mexican woman? I don't know. But so it's really hard for me to like make a distinction if it was because I'm a foreigner or if it's because I'm a woman. But I found that I could engage myself more in the projects with like on the boss level, even though I didn't have that position. So I think that was something that was really beneficial, because I also like to know, like, to get the overview of a project that I'm working with. But privately, I would say that the Mexican society still has chivalry. And if you would, and there's also like the backside and the foresight, because the chivalry of the Mexican society comes from treating women better than treating men. For example, if I am going through a door, a man would open the door for me, but it would not be expected for a woman to open the door for a man. And you know, invite, buy the food, pay for the food, borrow your jacket to a woman that's cold. So it's like, for me in Mexico, I really love those parts, and I really felt that I had a lot of benefits, and this cultural caring of Mexico, which you don't have in Sweden. And I think that's also because of the individualized, for example, I lived in Mexico for 7 years, but when I think I came when I was 22,
Yeah,
maybe
sort of.
22, something like that.
Yeah.
23, maybe 24, something like that. And then I left when I was just going to turn 30. So I normally feel like I kind of grew up like adulthood. I entered adulthood in Mexico. So for me, it was beautiful to be treated in that sense. I felt seen, and I felt important, and I felt cared for. And that also happened in like with colleagues and at workspaces. I felt like cared for. So like it's a difference between like what you expect like professionally from someone and the caring for. So I mean, of course, I had my conflicts and these like really hard situations, but in general, I would say it was a camaraderie among colleagues, and it was like that I don't and this caring for that I haven't seen in Sweden. But then also when I came back to Sweden, it was kind of like impossible for me to say that, well, I really like that a man opened the car door for me, or the restaurant door, or pays. I think that's nice. But I think also it's nice that I could do that back. Like, if you invite me dinner once, I can invite you to dinner the second time. And that I think was, it was something like, here in Sweden, I met a lot of like people that was women that was like, no, you can never let anyone invite you anything. You have to pay for yourself all the time. You have to do everything by yourself all the time. Don't accept the jacket if you're cold, because you have to be like, whoa.
Yeah, strong.
And I think,
yeah,
you have to be strong, and you have to be like, you don't accept anything from anyone. And I think that is really nice. And now I feel how, because there's been some years since I lived in Mexico, but I really feel that people see me different. Like people that know me, a lot in the beginning, they were like, but you're not Swedish, are you? Because I was open, and I was talking, and I was inviting, and I was like borrowing my jacket to people that were cold, and I invited people to dinner without saying, I invited 4 people, so only 4 people can come, which is like the traditional Swedish way. So I think culturally and socially, and I think maybe that is because this familiar, like family kind of culture is more caring and more inviting and more in that sense. So that is really beautiful, I think, about the Mexican society. I've been invited to weddings and social meetings, and to colleagues' homes, and to and really embraced in that sense, which is not as common in Sweden. But then that like, so it's like yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know if you were getting at this, Jorge, but it's kind of like a conflict between informality and really like nice and caring informality, but then in the formal, like conflict resolution, when it's really like at stake, something is at stake, we have a conflict here, we have to like, then I have found more difficulties. And it could be like systemic things, like for example that the salary system doesn't work, whatever, or that I had a boss that could not handle being a boss in that sense, and that would like destroy the environment of the whole. So I say privately, a lot of people ask me like if I would like to move back to Mexico, and I say like I would love to live in Mexico, because I really love the culture and the informality, the welcoming and the caring culture of society. But work-wise, in like in the work environment, it was really hard for me to feel that I could work in some of the jobs that I had, because then I felt these conflicts of being like, well, the female and then the system. So I don't know if I answered what you were out for, Jorge.
yeah, definitely, of course. Yeah, and also I mean, you're always free and welcome to come live to Mexico. We have cheaper rents, but lower salaries, and
Yeah.
have any retirement plans. So it's good that you can mix like retirement plan from Sweden and living here in Mexico. Maybe you can come to this casa de campo that you wish to have in the countryside of Mexico.
Yeah, with a nice climate also.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, climate has a lot to do with how people behave and are. Right now in Stockholm, how cold is it? Do you have already
Well,
the seasonal
yeah,
snow?
I live so Sweden is really like this is Sweden, like really long.
Yeah.
And I live maybe here. So here right now it gets dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, like black. And we have from like 0 degrees maybe, and like rainy, and there's no leaves and there's no green. Everything is like dying because it's too cold. But then if you go like 3 hours north or 4 hours north, now we have snow. And if you go into the country, like where it's like closer to Norway, where it's like mountains, they are supposed to have, they have been warned that tomorrow will be 25 degrees below 0 Celsius. And they have snow
You're
every
speaking
day.
about Lapland or a little bit below Lapland?
No, below Lapland, like where I'm going to. So it's like Lapland is about up here. So it's like here, like middle Sweden, you could say.
Yeah.
So if you go here, then down there's no snow yet, and then up we have snow already. So we don't have any snow. It's been snowing some of the days, but it doesn't stay on the ground. It just melts away. So yeah, it gets dark at 4 in the afternoon, and 0 degrees more or less, and it's gray. We haven't seen the sun for maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I don't know why we live here, basically.
Yeah,
but yeah, you're welcome to come to Sweden. But then I would suggest you come in the spring and summer, because that's when.
Yeah, in contrast, Sandra, we have midsummer.
Yes.
That you have around 22 hours of daylight, right?
Yes. In midsummer is the longest, around midsummer, like the mid of the summer is in June 26, 27, around there. Then we have the longest day, and then it's like it doesn't go pitch black. It gets like, like a dimmer lamp. So you start to dimmer down the lamp, and it goes down, and then it goes la 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 la, and then it's kind of pitch black for maybe half an hour, and then you start to dimmer it up again. So the sun rises really early, and yeah, so then it's not dark. And in the north, like up here that I showed you, like up in the north of Sweden, now they have maybe 1 or 2 hours of daylight up here, and in the summer they have no night at all. So the sun is up while they're sleeping in the middle of the night. So the northern Sweden is really interesting place, because I know in Mexico it's kind of like it changes a bit, but it's like it goes from day to night. There's no dimmer.
Yeah.
It goes like click, click. But in Sweden we always have this dimmer. So it's either like we have a lot of light or we have a lot of dark, but it's always like the dimmer up. Do you say dimmer in like, yeah, but you get the idea.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we use that concept, but not so common for weather or the daylight conditions, because as you mentioned before, we do have pitch black nights and we do have a lot of sunny days, but they're not always sunny as you have like 24-hour daylight. No, we don't have that yet, definitely.
No.
Thank you, Sandra. Guys, do you have any questions for Sandra? Any comments? Anything that you want to know specifically about her job, about Swedish culture, about how Swedes are? She's mentioned a lot of characteristics. Feel free to take this space, open your microphone. type any questions because we're almost over with Sandra's presentation. And okay, yeah, I'm gonna go really quick with of course, as a professor, I have to stick to the agenda. We've covered with your participation a lot of information regarding or pertinent to the course's material, of course. You've spoken about cultural awareness and sensitivity. You presented us a good example of how to manage in different situations, calling people by their names instead of by degrees, by their academic degrees. Using your naivety as a leverage, like presenting yourself, I don't know how to behave in this situation, so you can take an advantage to that. Of course, that's a really good way or an example to show that you can be aware and sensible, have sensitivity towards the culture. Of course, you've spoken about different examples of establishing diverse communication channels or ways to communicate. We've seen that through your examples, that like the bad experiences, but they also come handy in the way that we know how to behave differently. And of course, I want to re-emphasize in the matter of we as Mexicans, as a Latin American culture, we have to take into consideration these differences, especially when we are a really diverse cultural country and a really diverse in terms of how we manage to behave within each other. Of course, in the daily activities, we might lose the sensibility of knowing that some aspects of how we communicate or how we behave, they're not proper at all. What I'm trying to say is that, for example, machismo is really embedded in our culture, and it's really hard for us to see or behave outside these practices. So for you guys as a generation, as the young generation that it's currently leading and moving the working environments, it's really important for you to notice that and to take that in consideration. The promotion of the cross-cultural communication is essential for that part. Sandra mentioned a lot of examples that lacked accountability. So guys, please always remember and try to be as accountable as possible in any of your situations, like recognizing that you don't know how to behave or whatever you have to do. That's why we have bosses or superiors. Yes, in Mexico, this is like a really colonialism cultural aspect to it, that our superiors are people that don't need to be they don't need to be bothered, instead of being a figure of support, for example, as you mentioned in the Swedish culture. Also, really important about the psychological safety of the intercultural aspects. Yeah, sadly for us as a Mexican culture, we have these issues, as you mentioned before, like the payments and the salaries. Here in Mexico, we have to beg to be paid, right? And which that comes as a fundamental human right. But here we tend to use it as a leverage in terms of like the psychological exercise of imposing power. So it's really important to address that part. And I think that we covered a lot of information, like a little bit more the information that I was expecting to be covered. So thank you, Sandra, for your participation. Guys, Sandra is about to finish her presentation. Of course, Sandra, you feel free to stay on the session. Te puedes quedar el tiempo que quieras. It's 9 o'clock for you right now, right?
Yes, so it's time for me to walk the dog and go to bed.
Oh, yeah,
actually.
Yeah. We saw, like briefly, we saw your dog. He made a cameo appearance. There it is. Okay.
There he is.
Okay, what's his name?
He's Alvar, like Alvaro, but without the O on the end. It's a Nordic name, actually. It's foreign. It's like a traditional Nordic name, Alvar.